So this whole conversation around gun violence started as a result of what happened on August 27th, 2025. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are, and I'm going to turn it over to Manager Neal, and then we're going to turn it to our city attorney that we asked to do some work. And I thought a month or 6 weeks ago, Member Agnew really framed it up well when we had our conversation, and then we thought about looking at 3 different issues, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So I think we were all, I guess shattered is a good word, by what happened at Annunciation on August 27th. And our council passed a resolution after giving us some thought, because we know there are people on both sides of this issue. People that are ardent Second Amendment defenders, people that are concerned about gun violence, and gun violence is the #1 killer of kids in our country now. Wondering why in other countries they got mental illness too, but people aren't getting killed the way they're getting killed here with automatic weapons. And so this council had a good conversation about it, and we tried to think about what are the things that we were hearing people on both sides of the issue were concerned about. And of course, if you're, this isn't a blanket sort of statement, but we heard that it's a mental illness issue. And so we tried to address that in the proclamation the resolution that we passed. And I think it would be probably in the proclamation we'd send to the legislature, that we tried to deal with addressing some of these issues from a mental health standpoint. But then we also talked about dealing from a weaponry standpoint in our resolution. So we talked about the military-style automatic weapon, the ghost guns, 3D printed guns, high-capacity magazines. Some of the things that we thought were important to think about in terms of prohibiting the sale and possession of those assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And this conversation took place in the face of understanding that the law wasn't really on our side. The law is city regulations of firearms, ammunition, or components are expressly prohibited under state law. We understand that, but it still begged the question of a conversation, because this isn't the only law that in our history of our country that probably needed to be addressed and probably needed to be changed. I mean, look, in, what was it, 1917, women couldn't vote until 1914, 17, I think maybe they could vote. 1919, they could finally vote, somewhere in that era. I think my mother was born into a time when she couldn't vote. Separate but equal, segregation laws, interracial marriage, gay marriage. A lot of things have changed now from a legal standpoint. So we found ourselves talking about that, and Member Agnew came up with this based on our conversation. Thought, well, let's approach this from 3 standpoints. Let's look at a potential ordinance that might deal with this, similar to what St. Paul was working on at the time, and we knew that it was contingent in nature. And we were, I think, thinking the same thing, and I should have been a little bit more articulate myself, understanding that we weren't going to pass anything that our police department couldn't legally enforce, or that was something that would make their conduct illegal. So when you think about the state law prohibiting cities from regulating firearms or ammunition, we had that in the back of our head. Personally, I didn't articulate that as well as I should have. So we nonetheless asked our city attorney to take a look at what was possible from an ordinance standpoint. And we talked about some safe storage issues that we thought might be helpful. And then we talked about a proclamation or a resolution or a proclamation that we would send to the legislature, and then go over there with people that were like-minded to try to help any way we could. Was at least a thought I think that all of us had, because it's going to take some lifting over there. And then I can tell you that as mayors have had this conversation in the region, and I think it came from Governor Walz, was because there are folks on both sides of this issue, maybe it's an issue that should be appropriately handled by constitutional amendment. Let people vote. Let everybody in our state vote on this and decide whether or not some of these automatic weapons ought to be banned. So with that backgrounding of looking at those 3 things, what could we do? What would a gun safety ordinance look like, and what could a resolution look like. We asked our city attorney to take a look at it. I'm going to turn it now to Manager Neal, and then we're going to have Dave Kendall, our city attorney, tell us what his view of the world is from a legal standpoint and what some of the issues are that we need to be thinking about. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. Yes, just a quick background look. At our October 22nd meeting, there was a discussion of the council on this particular issue. You asked us to draft an ordinance kind of modeled after the St. Paul ordinance, and so I gave that direction to Mr. Kendall. And he has worked on that, and he has produced the ordinance that's in front of you tonight, that was in the packet tonight. Unfortunately, we're at a position where we can offer this resolution, or excuse me, offer this ordinance to you, but we can't endorse it because of the unenforceable nature, in our belief, of the ordinance, particularly because it is preempted by state statute. So I wanted to tell you that we're concerned about it from a staff standpoint. We talked a little bit about putting our police in the right positions always, and we have some concerns about the position this might put our police in to enforce an ordinance like this one. So I have asked the city attorney, Mr. Kendall, to go into a little bit more detail about his concerns, and we're happy to answer questions from the council.
Thank you, Manager Neal.
Mayor, I have drafted this ordinance per your instructions. It's based off the St. Paul ordinance. There is a variation in terms of the effective date. The St. Paul ordinance basically says that it'll be effective if and when state preemption is repealed. There's a number of different state statutes that potentially implicate preemption, and so there's an argument that maybe that language is not, it could be vague, is not clear enough. The effective date in this ordinance that I've crafted for Edina basically says that it'll be effective only if the city issues a resolution certifying that preemption has been lifted, and at that point it will be effective. So that should eliminate the vagueness issue. It should be clear to everyone in the city when the ordinance will be enforced, and that will be only after the city council issues a resolution certifying that. So by that, I've tried to craft it in such a way that I hope it would withstand legal challenge. But it should be, I think, clear, acknowledged that it would not be enforced until that time. So I wouldn't want it to provide, any kind of false sense of security or misleading aspect to the public that this would be enforced immediately, because it would not be. And that the reason for that is not to put the police into a position of trying to enforce a law, an ordinance that's preempted by state statute. If they were required to do that, I mean, potentially they'd be exposed to liability for wrongful arrest, wrongful search and seizure, false imprisonment, things like that, confiscation of property illegally. So unless and until state law is changed on that point, I don't think the council is in a good position to direct the police to enforce an ordinance that would require them to do those things. So that's the reason for the effective date. I hope that effective date would make it able to withstand legal challenge. So if the council should choose to go forward and pass it, I'd be happy to defend it on that basis. I think it is defensible on that basis. As your attorney, I cannot recommend that you pass an ordinance that is expressly preempted by state statute. But should you choose to do so, I'd be happy to defend it, and I hope it would be defensible.
All right, thank you. Questions from council members for Mr. Neal or David Kendall? Thoughts? Member Agnew.
Thank you, and thank you for preparing this. I think my first question, and you kind of already spoke to it, but this does more or less, I know that there's a little bit of a differentiation in the effectiveness, but this more or less mirrors what St. Paul is doing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and I think that they just voted, was it last week, recently, to approve theirs. So this is something that has already kind of been adopted by another city in Minnesota.
St. Paul did adopt it, and then they were subject to a lawsuit immediately after that.
Okay. Do you know the state of that?
The lawsuit?
Yeah.
I don't. The answer from St. Paul is not due yet, and I don't know, I don't think anything has happened since it's been filed.
Okay, thank you. I do think, one, there's a lot of conversation that we can have on that in and of itself of whether, just kind of where our comfort lies. I know I think based on the way that you've prepared this and the fact that there is the effective date, and looking at what St. Paul is doing, like this is still something that I am supportive of. And I think I would just look for some of that future collaboration of like, if we're potentially partnering with St. Paul to continue pushing this forward. And I also think it's worth us discussing whether we pull out the safe storage into a separate ordinance so that we can feel very, very confident that we can approve something today that goes into effect, whatever it is, 30 days or whenever we usually have things go into effect. Because I do believe that is not something that's preempted, and that's action that we could take immediately. So that is something I want us to talk about as a city. And then I think we should also talk about what does it mean to continue taking things forward. I think for me, like joining forces with St. Paul and saying that this is important to us and putting an ordinance in place is a part of that journey. But there's more that needs to happen at the state level as well. And so it's just, let's talk together about how we want to continue championing that.
Thank you, Member Hager. Yes, Councilmember Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I didn't think that this is what we were doing. And so maybe my notes are just wrong. And so I agree with the comments from Member Agnew, but I'll say it this way, just to cut through what I consider the noise to be. Essentially, we have an ordinance that is passive and does nothing.